This is Unit 10, Lesson 6. We're going to be talking about multi-step factoring. After this lesson, you will be able to GCF, that means greatest common factor, a polynomial before factoring, and completely factor a polynomial. So there's kind of some steps that you should check along the way. The very first step that you should do for every single problem is check to see if you can have a GCF. Remember that you should be checking for the coefficient number values as well as the variable exponent values. The next decision you need to make is decide if it's a binomial or a trinomial. If it's a binomial, that's where you're going to do a difference of squares. So remember where you take the square root of each of them and then you write your parentheses with their answers and opposite signs. A trinomial is where you multiply the first and the third and you start doing master product factoring. Once you've known how to factor it, that's exactly how you finish it up. Factor the remainder and you're going to end up with your GCF and your two factors. Here we go. Factor completely. 2x squared minus 12x plus 18. So the first thing I'm going to do is check to see if I can GCF. Well, I notice that all of these are even. So I know I can take out a 2. 18 does not have a variable. It's a constant, so I can't take out any variables. So I write my GCF on the outside, and I find my remainder. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I don't have to write the 1, so I just drop the x squared. Negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. The x drops down. And 18 divided by 2 is 9. So that is my very first step. Second step is to decide whether it's a binomial or a trinomial. I count my terms, 1, 2, 3, so I know that it's a trinomial, and I'm going to use master product. My last step is to finish factoring my remainder. Notice how this 2 on the outside just stays on the outside. Make sure it makes it to your final answer. So here we multiply 1 times 9 to get positive 9. I list my factors. I know that positive 3 and positive 3 multiply to positive 9, but they don't make negative 6. So then I change their signs to negative 3 and negative 3. I know that negative 3 times negative 3 equals positive 9. I also know negative 3 plus negative 3 adds to negative 6. So those are going to be my winning factors. So I'm going to rewrite what I have with my x squared first term staying the same. Notice how I'm not using the original, but I'm using from my remainder's original term. Then I have my plus 9. Again, that comes from my remainder, not from the original. And then I rewrite my factors of minus 3, don't forget the x, minus 3, don't forget the x. I group them in pairs of 2. I then take what I can greatest common factor out of each of those pieces. I know that I can take out an x from my first parentheses. So I write it as x parentheses. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 3x divided by x is negative 3. On the second set of parentheses, I know I can GCF out a negative because the first term is negative and a negative 3 because that goes into both of the terms. What I end up left with is a positive 1x minus 3. Remember the positive and the negative there, make that a negative 3. Now I know that my first part of my answer is what repeated, which is x minus 3. The second part of my answer is going to be my GCF, x from the first one minus 3 from the second one. And then I also make sure I have my GCF from the original part of the problem. So this is my final answer. One thing to notice, these factors repeat, so I would write my final answer as x minus 3 squared. And there you have it, is your final answer. Pause the video now as you take a look at example 2. Press play to go over your answer. First step, can you GCF? If you haven't tried this problem on your own, you need to. Stop being a wimp. So we take it, we realize a 9 can go into both. So I have 9, and then my remainder, I get 1x squared. I don't have to write the 1, minus, this time I do need to write the 1 because I can't have blank. So I have x squared minus 1. My next decision, is it a binomial or a trinomial? This one is going to be a binomial because there's 2 terms. So the next thing I'm checking for is whether or not when I factor it, it's a difference of squares. So first I got to make sure it's a difference. It has a minus sign, so it's a difference. Then I make sure it's made up of perfect squares. X squared is made up of x and x. 1 is made up of 1 times 1. So then I set up my parentheses. I put the first term in the front. I put the second term in the back, and I give them opposite signs. And of course, don't forget your original greatest common factor. There you have it, is my final answer for example 2. Pause the video now as you try example 3. Press play to go over your answer. If you're just watching the video to be able to write stuff down, that's not you trying your best. Make sure you paused it, give it your full effort. So I check to see if I can greatest common factor. On this one, I can take out a 4 from everything. I also notice that they all have a variable. So I'm going to take the smallest amount available. So my greatest common factor from the original is 4x. I'm left with 1x squared minus 10x plus 25. Now I check to see if it's a binomial or a trinomial. This one's a trinomial because it has 3 terms, so I multiply the first and the third to begin master product. Master product for factoring this, 1 times 25 is positive 25. I know factors of positive 25. I need to add to negative 10, so I choose the factors of negative 5 and negative 5. Again, negative 5 times negative 5 is going to give me positive 25. Negative 5 plus negative 5 is going to give me negative 10. So then I rewrite my problem. Remember, it should be the original from your remainder, not from the beginning of the problem. So we write x squared, and we keep this third term, again, not from the original problem, but from my remainder. Now I'm going to write my factors of minus 5x, don't forget the x, and minus 5x. Parentheses around pairs of 2. Now we're going to greatest common factor out of each of them. I can take out an x from the first parentheses, and that will leave me with x minus 5. I can take out a negative 5. Again, it's negative because the first term is negative, and I can take that from both terms, and I'm left with an x minus 5. Don't forget, positive, negative, make that a negative. First part of my answer is the repeating parentheses of x minus 5. And then my second part of my answer is my greatest common factor of x minus 5 as well. And of course, I can't forget my original greatest common factor. That's the most common thing people forget on their final answer for a multi-step factoring is the original greatest common factor. I notice that these are exactly the same symbol in the middle, so I write my final answer with my greatest common factor, and then I write that factor squared. This is your final answer. Pause the video now as you try example 4. Press play to go over your answer. Don't be lame and not pause it. Try. You're better than that. I can take out my greatest common factor of x to the third. There's no number I can take out, but they both have a variable. So I have x to the third, parentheses, 16x squared minus 1. I check to see if my remainder is a binomial or a trinomial. This one's a binomial because it's 2 terms. When factoring a binomial, I need to make sure it's a difference of squares. So if I have a difference, I should have a subtraction sign. If I have squares, I should have perfect squared numbers. I do, so I'm going to go ahead and factor it. The square root of 16 is 4, so I know 4 times 4. The square root of x squared is x times x. The square root of 1 is 1 times 1. I write my first term in the front. I write my second term in the back, and I give it opposite signs. The last thing, don't forget your greatest common factor from the beginning of the problem. This is your final answer. Great job. Pause the video now as you try example 5. Press play to go over your answer. Do it. Greatest common factor, we can take out a 5x. That leaves us with 5x, x squared plus 6x plus 8. Now we're going to check to see, is it a binomial or a trinomial? This one's a trinomial with 3 terms, so I begin master product. Factoring the remainder, I know I get positive 8 when I multiply my first and third term. Factors that are going to make 6 are going to be 2 and 4. Those multiply to 8 and they add to 6. So that's how I know I've chose my winning factors. So I'm going to rewrite what I have, keeping the first from my remainder, which is x squared, keeping the third from my remainder, which is 8, replacing the middle with my factors. Positive 2x, don't forget the x, plus 4x, don't forget the x. Parenthesis, we're going to greatest common factor each parenthesis. On the first one, I can take out an x, and I'm left with x plus 2. On the second one, I can take out a positive 4. And that's going to leave me with x plus 2. I know this part of my parentheses repeats, so that's going to be x plus 2 is one of my factors. I'm then going to have my greatest common factors grouped together for x plus 4. Don't forget your original greatest common factor. Most common thing people forget is the original greatest common factor. It still is part of your answer. Pause the video now as you try example 6. Press play to go over your answer. I believe in you. I know you can do this. Try your best. Can you GCF? Divide by 5. GCF on the outside, x squared minus 9. Is it a binomial or a trinomial? It's a binomial. So when I'm factoring it, I check to see if it's a difference of squares. So now the difference would be the subtraction sign. Squares would be whether or not these are perfect squares. They are, so I'm going to go ahead and factor them. In order to get x squared, I need x times x, which will go in the front of my parentheses. I then need 9, which is going to be made up of 3 times 3, which is going to go in the back of my parentheses. I use opposite signs, and I drop down my original greatest common factor. There you have it, your final answer. Pause the video now as you try example 7. Press play to go over your answer. You're almost in the home stretch. You're almost done. You really should be doing this by yourself now. Try your best. Greatest common factor. I can take out an x. I can also take out, I'm going to try 2 and see what happens. They're both even, so I know 2 goes into it. 2x, I end up with 16x squared minus 25. I check to see if it's a binomial or a trinomial. In this case, it's a binomial with 2 terms. When factoring a binomial, I check to see if it's a difference of squares. A difference would have a subtraction sign, and I should have perfect squares as my terms. Since I do, I'm going to go ahead and factor both. In order to get a 16x squared, I need 4x times 4x. That's going to go in the front of my parentheses. I then need to have 25 made up of 5 times 5. That's going to go in the back of my parentheses. I'm then going to give them opposite signs and drop down my original greatest common factor. There you have it, your final answer for example 7. Last one. Pause the video now as you try example 8. You really should be doing this completely on your own. I believe in you. Believe in yourself. Okay, on this one, I'm looking for something I can take out of all of them. In this case, it's going to be a 6x. I write my greatest common factor, and my remainder is going to be 2x squared plus x, you can put the 1 in front if you want to, minus 6. I check to see whether or not it's a binomial or a trinomial. This one's a trinomial, so I know I'm going to use master product. When factoring by master product, I get a negative 12. Factors of negative 12 that make positive 1 are going to be negative 3 and positive 4. I rewrite my problem, keeping the original term of 2x squared. Remember, it's not the original problem, but from my remainder. I take my original third term of minus 6. I replace my middle term with my 2 winning factors. Minus 3x, don't forget the x, plus 4x, don't forget the x. I then group in pairs of 2. Now that we're in pairs of 2, we're going to go ahead and greatest common factor each parenthesis. On the first one, I can go ahead and take out an x from both terms. That's going to give me 2x minus 3 left over. I'm then going to take out on the second one a positive 2. That is going to leave me with 2x minus 3. I know that my first part of my answer is going to be my repeated parentheses of 2x minus 3. The second part of my answer is going to be my greatest common factors pushed together, x plus 2. And of course, do not forget, the most common mistake people make is forgetting that original greatest common factor. There you have it, final answer, and you did it. Great job. Have a wonderful day.